When FSDT was established, there was need to have trustees coming from the private sector and also coming from the public sector. From the public sector, the BOT and the Ministry of Finance were just the natural partners because they are the ones who have oversight of financial policies, sector oversight, and that the people who would be able to work with FSDT. So that was the most appropriate corporate instrument that could be used to set up FSDT. And it has worked well over the years. FSDT has supported the BOT in establishing the financial payment system, which is very critical in supporting digital financing. And when you look at statistics, especially the fiscal reports that come from the FSDT, you will see that these groups have greatly benefited from digital money. My view of where FSDT is headed now is to continue focusing on the same original groups. Why? Because especially women and the youth are very active in the small-scale sector and the informal sector. And the informal sector, especially with women, is almost, according to statistics, up to 60% of the participants in the economy, which means it is still very crucial to continue focusing on these groups and to continue identifying the tools and the means and the policies that can assist these groups to continue having access to funds that can help them grow their economy.
Back then, FSDT's focus was entirely on access. The notion of what today we call financial inclusion was barely on the radar. Things like theories of change certainly were not. That emphasis on access was entirely understandable and indeed appropriate. So many people and small businesses had so little, if any, access to formal or even semi-formal financial services. The first FinScope in 2006 showed levels of financial exclusion for adults around 54%. Over a third of adults relied solely on informal services such as Vicobas and VSLAs, and that what was a predominantly rural population found that their meagre savings, either in money or indeed assets, didn't go very far and often relied on family and friends for financial services and financial support. No one then knew just what impact mobile money and the digital ecosystem was going to have on the financial world and indeed people's lives. Introducing this survey was one of our early successes, and I'm delighted to say that has endured. It remains a game changer and a public good, although additional sources of funding are still needed for its sustainability. We took some substantial risks, some of which paid off, others, I have to say, didn't. One that did was that we lent BRAC $6 million in senior unsecured debt to start up their Tanzanian microfinance operation, with a particular focus on women. When Sir Fazli Abed, BRAC's late founder, asked me why I was going to provide debt and not a grant, when the World Bank and all sorts of other people did just that, I admittedly rather impertinently replied, not only was I not the World Bank, but BRAC were a group of grown-ups and I were going to treat you as grown-ups. One decision over which I agonised for ages was to give a grant to National Microfinance Bank to kickstart their digital banking system and business model. Was this unfair to others? Was this going to be market distorting? Would it even make a difference? Well, we signed off on that. After I'd left, SOS told me that the bank's then CEO had noted that the difference that our funding made was that it got NMB's board off the fence where they were sitting and embark on their digital journey. And so often with FSDs, you have to accept that as a decision maker, you may not be around to see the payoff. That goes with the territory. FSDT has been through some ups and downs, some tough times, but what FSD hasn't. But you're still standing. You're clearly still got a valuable role to play, and keep on doing that. So I wish FSDT and all who sail in her the very best. Perhaps not for the next 20 years, because I hope that before then you will indeed have done yourself out of a job, but certainly for the next 5, maybe 10.
It has taken a lot to actually deliver those results. You know, working with policymakers, working with private sectors like banks, microfinance institutions, the insurance industry, pension systems, telecom companies who came with new technologies to enable financial inclusion to expand. But at the same time, we read that people had needs which could be solved by financial solutions. FSDT thought of different mechanisms to influence change in the marketplace. This was through thought leadership. The second one, in terms of influencing change, was evidence. The third we call convening power. Without good information, without evidence, it was not possible for anybody to come up with sustainable solutions or make the right decisions at the right time, because having information was the real game in the market. FinScope was one of the studies that was conducted in Tanzania for the first time in 2006. This revolutionized the way we looked at customers and their needs. FinScope was used to influence the decisions by the government to accept the introduction of mobile money in Tanzania. We had institutions, companies who came first to introduce mobile money as an industry. It was difficult, Bank of Tanzania, to accept a new way that is not coming from a financial system. But because evidence existed, it was a little easier to convince the central bank to say, if you wait for banks to deliver these financial services, they will take ages. But here is the way that we can accelerate. That was the beginning of how mobile money was adopted in the country, particularly by the policymakers. Looking at these areas in terms of distribution, creating the environment that is conducive for transactions to take place was also an area that FSD influenced. We started with the mobile money, but then that was not really in the early game, because we needed an interoperable market. And then today we have TIPS, Tanzania Instant Payment Systems, all facilitated by FSDT as well. So in driving innovations, FSDT crafted several programs or approaches to ensure that appropriate responses are given. On the insurance side, we promoted the Bima Challenge that the market adopted, and we see products being developed and uptake increasing over time. Only specific market products like farmers or low-income people, we designed what we call the FinDisrupt to bring the disruption in the minds of the providers, fintechs, innovators, to respond to the needs of specific markets. Supported by analysis, FSD was able to show where the opportunities are, whether it is the scale of the market or the size of the money, or the partnerships that would be needed, or the technologies that would be encouraged in order to drive those changes. And today we see a number of banks, for example, launching products or have launched products as a result of that process. Obviously, there are much more investments they did themselves thereafter, like NBC with NBC Shambani, or NMB Chap accounts, or CRDB's Popote Olipo Tupo. All those are different versions of how FinDisrupt ignited this kind of thinking in the market. Finance drives value by facilitating jobs, incomes, improving livelihoods, education, and the like. So thinking forward, it means people are going to eat, they're going to need houses, they will buy cars, they want to live happily, which means better economic performance, facilitated by the financial system. So the nexus between finance and development, it's even more important today if we think the next 10 to 15 years to 50 years.
It was so important for FSDT to make the shift from just overall looking at the financial inclusion and going into a more segment-focused approach. And this was actually mainly driven by data and information. Some of the analysis that we were able to see there is you would see financial inclusion was growing. But again, if you just now start to go into the different segments, you're seeing stagnancy. Specifically for women, we could see a persistent gap between those 2 years. So as a result of that, we saw the need to go deeper and start understanding more the dynamics that are existing within the different segments so that we are able to be more intentional and we are able to understand better and actually be able to respond in the right way within the market system. If you look at the MSMEs, small, medium and small business enterprises, 54% of the MSMEs are women. And most of these MSMEs are mostly informal. So if they are informal and if you are to address women, then you need to actually be able to see and understand how we can study those businesses, we can be able to map the journey within those particular businesses that are predominantly women-based so that we can actually be able to design the right solutions that are actually around the activities that the most women are actually going. And for us as FSDT, this was really critical that we do this research, we bring the information, we bring the evidence on the table. Specifically, I remember we did gender diagnostics study. This study was phenomenal because it provided the use cases, viable use cases, and saying if you are to actually address a women's problem, this is really the kind of activities that women are actually doing. So therefore, let's go into those activities and try to understand the volumes. And a similar sort of activity that we did was around mamalishe. Most of the mamalishes, obviously, it's a mamalishe, so it's obviously women. Then we say, hey, here is a use case. So we can actually be able to do research and information and bring it out there and say, here's a use case. This is how many mamalishes exist. This is how their business is run. So hey, the different service providers and their overall ecosystem come, let's think about this, because if we address this and find a way to be able to formalize it, digitalize it, and be able to provide a solution, we will be solving a woman's case. So it was really important for us to actually be able to bring the evidence so that we can actually be able to take it for policy decision. So decisions could be made so that we are able to address young people who are already active in the economy. 15, 16 years, you already see them in the streets, they're already in town, doing odd jobs here and there, but really trying to actually thrive and survive and actually be able to be independent. Because I'm a financial inclusion enthusiast, I would definitely like to see no one being excluded, and that's possible, especially in the age of technology and information and communication that we are in. Then definitely that's a possibility, and maybe should even happen before 20 years. That's where I see it. But most importantly, it's not about having access to financial services. It's what is more important is what that finance is actually result. The future that I see is people are actually able to use different financial tools for the different use cases in their lives. They are able to cope, with shocks and uncertainties of life, but what is most importantly, they are able to actually be able to manage their economic activity, access to facilities, access to different kinds of mixture of facilities which are really critical in the economic situation.
In the implementation of the 2022-2026 strategy, we realized that we needed to cast the net a little wider and include other segments that were maybe not in the, or were not considered during the design. Yes, we maintained women, young people, and farmers. So we did diagnostics just to understand. We used influencers to go and speak to them to get a better understanding of the challenges they are facing. And a lot of the challenges were access to affordable credit that will allow them to grow their businesses. This was then easily relayed to policymakers and financial sector providers, and we were very happy with the response, because then we got to see more matching-friendly financial services as a result. NBS has always been a very important partner during the previous cycles of FinScope, but this time we were able to truly engage, and taking into consideration that the national census had just been completed. So we were able to overlay financial inclusion data to the data that they already collected. As a result, we also contributed to a more robust data set that NBS and policymakers are still using. So for me, I think that was my most proudest moment, where we got to collaborate with the National Bureau of Statistics. In terms of FSDT's significant impact, I think the list is very long, but for me, I believe is the data that has been provided by the various cycles of FinScope. Because when you look from cycle 1, that data has really influenced the market. I believe there is a lot that needs to happen, considering the importance of the financial sector in national development in Tanzania. And I think one of it is the development of digital infrastructure development, whereby there is a need to expand reliable mobile and internet coverage in the rural areas. I think the financial sector definitely needs to strengthen its digital payment systems, especially the interoperability of digital systems, and maybe with the critical registries. I think also as we develop and as technology is developing, there is definitely a need to invest in cybersecurity infrastructure, as well as maybe improve the digital ID systems and biometric verification.
When you look at uptake and usage, which meaning how do Tanzanians utilize a wide variety of financial services, I would still say that that number is still low. So in terms of access, in terms of ensuring that the majority of the Tanzanian population lives within 5 kilometers of a financial access point, that's largely been achieved mainly through expansion of banking branches, but also expansion of mobile money. From that standpoint, in terms of being able to access financial services, that has been a huge success. However, when you talk about usage and utility of financial services, there's still a challenge to usage, because if you look at our FinScope survey, cash is still king. So we still have quite a bit of work to do in ensuring that the financial sector, in terms of the products that are developed, that these products actually take into account, or are more inclusive in terms of taking into account the actual economic circumstances that most Tanzanians face. One way to ensure that FSDT remains relevant to the market, first of all, we're quite happy as FSDT in terms of being a market systems development of the way the market, of the evolution that has taken place in the market over the last 20 years, where you are seeing the financial sector continue to innovate, and you are seeing increasingly, especially on the government side of things, a lot of the roles that FSDT kind of used to fill in are now taken up by specific units, both within the Bank of Tanzania and the Ministry of Finance. You have the National Council for Financial Inclusion that oversees the implementation of the National Financial Inclusion Framework. So these are all positive market systems changes, where the government is increasingly becoming more innovative in terms of ensuring the enactment or reforms to policies and regulations that govern the financial sector, that enable the financial sector to be more innovative. So for us as FSDT, what we're primarily focused on is forming new partnerships, especially around livelihoods. So when you look at organizations that are responsible for sort of developing livelihoods, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation when it comes to financial inclusion, because for one to be financially included, they have to have an income. For one to have an income, they have to have a livelihood and, or a job or something that earns them an income. So we are looking at developing partnerships, both traditional but also non-traditional partnerships, especially with organizations that work primarily on livelihoods, and then to look at how financial services can come and address, can be brought in to address specific challenges that pertain to that particular livelihood, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in small businesses or what have you, or mining, or whatever sector, the target segment that we are looking at, which is women and youth who are either excluded or underserved. Another thing that we're doing is continuing to invest in evidence-based research. So both at national level with our FinScope survey, which we've just done the 5th wave for, nationwide surveys like the MSME survey as well, which we are gearing up to do in 2025. We're also quite focused on supporting digital public infrastructure. So if you look at things like the Tanzania instant payment system, which sort of combines transactions, which allows transactions from both banks and from mobile network operators and fintechs, and for the development of additional use cases. I see the levels of financial inclusion increasing. However, what we do hope to see is also more Tanzanians actually living within 1 kilometer of a financial access point. 5 kilometers is the standard, but I think if you had more Tanzanians living within 1 kilometer of a financial access point, as is the case in Dar es Salaam, but across the country, then that would also be indicative of usage of financial services, because it means that financial service providers will have seen the need of putting more access points closer to people, which should bode quite well for usage.
The FSDT has been evolving alongside the sector itself. And all the time, the strategies that the FSDT has been bringing up has been aligning to the sector needs. And there are quite a lot that FSDT has contributed in the sector transformation. One of it is the research and evidence on the demand side of the financial services. That has not been there before. So this is actually the product that FSDT has brought in the market. And this has saved quite a lot, particularly for the financial sector services providers, because that has given them the context of the market to understand the demand that is there, to understand the various needs of the sector, in particular the individuals and businesses in Tanzania, so that they can actually respond by coming up with the appropriate products. And we have seen the players in the financial sector actually responding in various ways. So this has been really transformational. The second one is actually about the access to the financial services. FST has been part and parcel working with the government and other players in the market to find the way actually to improve the access. You may recall actually in the past it's been very hard for people to access the financial services, which are critical for their livelihood, but also for their economic activities. They've worked in various ways, and through that we can actually now say that access is no longer an issue. Like every individual in Tanzania, being rural, being in urban areas, is actually very close to financial services points, either being a bank branch or what we call a Kala. However, there are still key, I think, challenges that underlines or underpins the usage of the financial services. There are still some issues. So in terms of what FSC should focus in the future?
I think the future should still be women and the youth.
I think can make the difference. The sector is actually addressing the issues that underpins the usage of the financial services.
I also see a future where Tanzanians are included in a meaningful manner, meaning that the financial sector really develops products and services that actually the needs of most Tanzanian women and youth, and that Tanzanian women and youth report, feel confident in terms of their capability to interact with financial services, but also to make informed choices in terms of the products and solutions that they engage in for the betterment of their own lives. That enables them to now utilize a wide variety of financial service products for their improved resilience and well-being. So.